Atari sues Activision, Sega takes on the Game Boy, and Nintendo gives away gloves. These stories and many more on this month's episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man.
What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, the joke didn't land. Oh well, doesn't matter. So, as always this month, we will be looking back at the biggest stories in and around the video game industry in June of 1980, 1990, and 2000. And as always, we'll mostly be using magazine cover dates and those of other media sources for our dating purposes. Obviously, this means that the events happened a little bit earlier, but this at least keeps us somewhat synchronized with all the news. And, well, I guess this is the part where we have to do some small talk. How has life in COVID land been for you, Peter?
Actually, I do not really feel the impact of COVID anymore. I mean, yes, you have to wear masks everywhere, but other than that, I mean, work goes on like usual. Well, it's not entirely business as usual because we're just started a whole new project, building a new hospital, and Jesus. So yeah, the private life is basically gone.
You mean no more downtime for you? I tell you, terrible, terrible, terrible.
Dude, it's really hard when being at work and not being able to take a nap every now and then.
So you're saying that that's the excuse why we're recording this on the 29th of June. Our June episode is on the 29th of June.
Well, yes. And dude, I mean, comparing it to the first couple of episodes we recorded, I think this is pretty good. I mean, at least it's July.
This is true. And we've been keeping people busy with the wonderful interview episodes, so yes. I guess it's not all that bad.
Right, you're doing all the work.
Yes, exactly. I'm doing all the work. So for those not in the know, we've been doing the interview episodes as well. You can check those out, obviously, on the feeds here. And what I've been trying to do is keep at least one, sometimes two interviews on Patreon before they get released outside. So if you want to drop us $1, literally just $1, you can become a patron and access those a little bit early. Right now, the interview that's up there is the first part of my interview with Don Daglow, a true legend of the industry, going all the way back to PDP-10 gaming, and he's still active to this day. So, fascinating stories, early days of electronic arts, working on the Intellivision, the creation of essentially the first RTS, Utopia, developing games for SSI like Stronghold, and the first graphical MMO, Neverwinter Nights, back for AOL. So, fascinating stories. And that's enough of that plug, I guess.
One more thing before we dive deep into the video game related topics.
Yes.
If our dear listeners hear any sirens going on, this is not at your place. This is at my place, because right across the street there's a house burning, and they are currently working on pouring in as much water as they can.
So, see, everybody, this is how dedicated we are. There's danger within striking distance.
Right into the danger zone, right?
Yes, exactly. And we're still recording for you the last possible day so that we don't lose the megabytes on our Libsyn account.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm the last guy in this house here, but I'm staying, man.
Yep.
No. Everything here is fine. It's totally under control.
Good. Okay. Links to how to get a hold of us on Twitter, Instagram, email is all down in the description. Like us on YouTube, on your podcasting app, and do all that good stuff. And the link to the Patreon is also in the show notes. As always, the sources for the articles that we're talking about are also in the show notes. So, just go to town, click on the stuff. If we describe something that you think it looks really cool, then by all means, check it out. So, I guess we have to turn on the time machine and let's make our first jump into the past back to June of 1980.
Personal computers that can swallow a book. 1980. Games people play.
Welcome to June of 1980. Peter, what's our first headline?
Oh man, are we really in 1980? Working from home by computer is becoming a reality.
40 years before telecommuting became a standard due to COVID-19, Control Data Corporation, owners of the Plato computer system, has started a program to retrain employees who have lost their job at the company due to medical reasons. The retraining will teach the employees programming over the Plato terminal system. Now, we've talked about Plato a couple of times over the last few months. And for those not in the know, just a quick primer, it was a server-side based computing system, revolutionary screen technology and video quality and so on and so forth. And the CDC, the Control Data Corporation, not the Center for Disease Control, Control Data Corporation has been having some serious financial troubles. The Plato system was really, really big at certain universities, research facilities, and some corporations, but is having a hard time adapting to the new market for microcomputers. With more microcomputers coming out, prices dropping, the idea of paying lots and lots of money, I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars for the rental of these Plato units is starting to become less and less attractive to users. And the idea of them using the technology to help their workers come back in feels a bit, to me, less like a practical application for Control Data Corporation and more like a really cool marketing tool to try to find a new use for the Plato technology.
So how can I picture it? Control Data Corporation fires some employees due to medical reasons. Welcome in America. And then they're like, but we can offer you a free or not so free retraining. So you can start working for us again until you get another medical condition, and then we'll fire you again. And then
it's not firing. It's simply the employee is no longer fulfilling their contractual obligations to the corporation by not being able to perform the duties that they had contractually agreed to fulfill.
Yeah.
So
only an American
not
can
firing. It's yes. The inequities of the American lack of social safety net, which are in clear evidence right now. I don't think we're getting political by saying that.
For your
yeah. So basically, they were just showing them how to program the machine and trying to retrain them to be able to do programming style tasks, data management tasks that they could then perform from home thanks to the Plato terminals. And you can imagine that this would also be helpful for other companies trying to figure out ways to use skilled workers, people who already knew the internal processes and stuff, and still be able to keep them within the company as opposed to letting them go, because retraining an employee is not all that cheap. So, but again, we've already gone through the history of what's going to happen with this a few months ago, and the Plato system is going to continue to cost them money, and pretty soon it is just going to be sold off, unfortunately. It's not going to save them. But, given the current circumstances, I thought it was a cool little callback or parallel. But it's not the only one we're going to see this month. So, okay, on to the next story.
TI gets patent for synth chip.
Originally released in 1978 in their Speak and Spell learning device, Texas Instruments has finally gotten patents for their speech synthesis chip designs. The chips would not only make the super popular learning toys Speak and Math and Speak and Read, but be used in countless arcade games and other computer-based applications. The division of Texas Instruments responsible for the design would finally close down in 2001 and be sold off to Sensory Incorporated.
So how did those things work? Did you and how do some letters sound and they combine the letters to a word, or how does it work?
Well, I never used a Speak and Math or a Speak and Read, but I can tell you how the Speak and Spell work because I had one as a kid. And the images of them are really cool. You just have to Google it. And if you're watching this on YouTube or on certain platforms, you can see the image, the cover image for this episode will have Speak and Spell on it. It was this cool device. It had a handle on it so a little kid could carry it. It had a keyboard on it. And it would speak a word. So it would tell you a word, like, for example, angel. And you'd have to type in the word angel. And then it would tell you if you got it right or wrong. So by having the synthesis chip, you could really practice spelling, which, let's face it, if there's anything in English that doesn't make any sense, it is definitely spelling. So this was a really cool tool as a kid to improve my spelling skills.
Did it help?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was one of those things where it felt like you were playing a game. It felt also like you were playing technology. This is at a time when no console in the home, no computer in the home, no handheld games in the home. This was my electronic toy, and it was just like I was getting better and better at it. And so, I played with that thing constantly. It was fun. So, no, definitely an amazing piece of tech. This lab actually ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of their speech synthesis chips end up in other devices, pinball machines, all sorts of things. There's a link to a Wikipedia entry on them in the show notes. Definitely worth checking out. Long history of this company. And, of course, by 2001, most of this stuff had become standard inside computers. You didn't need specialty chips for this kind of stuff anymore. I mean, there's still high-end uses for this kind of tech, but standard computers could do a lot of this already on their own.
Yeah.
So, okay. And sticking with computers.
Yeah, Radio Shack announces intensification of computer product support.
With the TRS-80 line growing, Tandy Corporation has decided to intensify their promotion and support for the systems through their Radio Shack chain of stores. The Radio Shack computer centers have been opened in 50 major markets offering on-site service as well as home repair service, classrooms, sales rooms, etc. Ultimately, these retail positions will lay the foundation of the ubiquitous Tandy demo units of the late 80s and early 90s and an abandonment of Radio Shack's traditional hobbyist focus. So, yeah, this was huge. I mean, I remember this starting to pop up everywhere when I was a kid. Yeah, because Radio Shacks were everywhere. It was this weird franchise that you didn't know that many people who bought stuff there, but the people who were, radio and electronics enthusiasts back in the days when you were buying individual transistors and soldering them together to make different things happen, that was their store. And and now suddenly they had these like cornered off pieces of the store. I remember one of them in a shopping mall near a friend's house where the computer section of the store was actually behind glass. So you had to go through a glass door, and it was like you were silent so you could hear the computer sounds better and stuff. And this is going to become the main focus of Radio Shack for quite a while. They're never going to completely give up on the little transistors and stuff, but they'll keep getting pushed further and further back into little corners of the store as time goes on. And I mean, this is going to make the Tandy 1000 the most successful PC in the United States until the mail order machines like Dell and Gateway come in, which can adapt their hardware specifications much faster than a retail store like Radio Shack can. And then very quickly they're just going to fall by the wayside. And yeah, it's going to be a difficult road for Radio Shack until they finally collapse in the 2000s. So, but this is an important moment where a lot of smaller areas and smaller towns that weren't going to be large enough to support a mom and pop computer shop were suddenly going to have a computer shop. So it's huge. It is huge. And speaking of huge,
Microsoft gets into the hardware game.
Microsoft has entered the world of hardware with the Z80 soft card, an add-on board for the Apple II. The soft card has a Z80 chip on board and lets you switch between the Apple's 6502 CPU and the Z80, letting you run software written for either processor, including CP/M and the newest version of Microsoft BASIC.
Well, that's kind of interesting. Microsoft gets into the hardware game and develops stuff for Apple. Cool.
It's a topsy-turvy world. It's a topsy-turvy world.
Yeah. Things were well then.
Yeah.
But how can I like pictures? I mean, I had a look at this the Z80 soft card. It's basically a plug-in device, a plug-in chip. But how do you like switch between the Apple 6502 CPU and the Z80? We have to switch.
I believe that there was a boot up program to activate that. I read it, and honestly, it's been like a month and a half since I read up on it. I think it was a boot up program. There's links down below that explain it a little bit better. There's long articles about it from Creative Computing Magazine. And so what it would allow you to do is basically use the video interface inside the Apple to use the Apple and the Apple keyboard and so forth. And you're just bypassing the 6502 processor. And the reason the Z80 is important is the Z80 has a lot of compatibilities with the IBM chips. The Z80 was basically like a knockoff semi-compatible version of IBM's 8086 processors, while the 6502 was a knockoff of, I can't remember which other computer makers' chips. And while the 6502 was super popular for a lot of machines, the Z80 is going to be big in a lot of European machines, but the Z80 is going to continue to have more of a professional cachet. So the idea that the Apple II is the most expensive of these machines, it's also the one that's built from the ground up for add-ons, because it's got this thing you just open up, you can add stuff to it. I mean, that's why Wozniak designed it that way, with expandability in mind and hobbyists in mind. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you could put this other chip in there, and while you could still run your Apple software if you wanted to, you also had access suddenly to a completely different computer platform software, was kind of a big deal. And also gave Microsoft a very cheap way of getting into hardware, getting maybe some experience with hardware. And
the thing cost $350 for the customer.
Well, yeah, but remember, the Apple is by far the most expensive of the home computers, standard home computers at this time. So if you're already buying an Apple II in 1980, $350 is not your biggest extra expense. Especially if you can now run all the business software that you're probably running at work out on your home machine. Yeah. So, and CP/M is an operating system. DOS is very, very much based off of CP/M. And so it was a operating system that was meant to be run on a bunch of different computer systems. And it allowed you to have a huge amount of compatibility between computers that otherwise would not be compatible with one another. So again, this is one of those things where if you're a business person and you want to be able to do some work at home, and you were using a mainframe or a mini computer, this was your out. This was the way to get mini computer style programs running on a home machine. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to last, but it's an interesting sort of workaround.
Yeah. Maybe they developed something like that for the PS5 and the Xbox.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, for example, the PS2 had a PS1 basically layout on a chip built in, so you had the backwards compatibility. And it's not unprecedented to have that extra bit layer of hardware. The Sega Genesis essentially does the same thing with Master System hardware. The Master System is basically recreated on the Genesis motherboard, so both systems software could work on it. The Game Boy Advance could play Game Boy games. The Game Boy Color could play Game Boy games. And the DS could play advanced games. So
it's interesting that those new consoles make advertisement by mentioning that they are partially or more or less fully backwards compatible. Like, yeah.
Well, of course. I mean, think about the investment you have in software.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good thing, one console to rule all, of course. But still, I mean, as you just said, Nintendo had it, Atari had it, whoever. It's nothing new.
Oh, of course. It goes all the way back to the very first systems because, let's face it, it's people don't want to feel like they have to now start from scratch with their collections.
Right, and people's girlfriends and wives, sorry, but and you know what I'm aiming at, yeah?
I know.
The deal. 2 consoles is okay. 3, no. So get rid of either one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just like trying to convince your parents that you desperately need a computer to help you with your homework when you know perfectly well it's got 2 joystick ports for a reason.
Oh yeah, sure. 2 hopeless battles.
Yes. Okay, but there are bigger things going on than just backward compatibility.
Right, something new is coming. Digital audio is coming.
Creative Computing Magazine has a detailed write-up on several new digital audio standards that are on the horizon, and they correctly point out that Philips's upcoming compact disc standard looks to be the most promising. And yeah, this was a huge, huge thing at the time was now with digital information storage, when are we going to get it for both audio and video? And the CD was on its way.
For me, it's so interesting, the CD is something I'm so super used to. It's not like, oh, there's something new on the horizon. It's going to be a CD. Wow. Just having a look around in this room, I see so many CDs here. We don't even use them anymore.
And I don't have any CDs anymore, so go figure. I mean, I've come full circle. It's a technology that had its time and is now basically outdated. But at this point in time in the early 1980s, when you're still surrounded by vinyl records and cassettes are there. I mean, you can still buy 8 tracks at this point. The idea of having this digital audio with super crystal clear sound that you could just jump to a track randomly, not randomly, but on demand, was like magic.
Yeah.
I mean, and that, and the fact that it's being controlled by a microchip, that's the big deal, because we've talked about it before, how more and more microchips were landing in things like cars and stuff. This is basically the beginning of the world as we know it today, where everything's got a chip in it. And everything is doing something through a microprocessor. Well, this is basically where that gets started. And you're taking something that has been analog for over 100 years, recorded music, and now you're having it controlled by a computer. So it's pretty kick-ass.
Mm-hmm.
To say nothing of the potential for gaming. But that's another issue entirely for another time.
Exactly. But staying within the 1980s, Atari launches a nationwide ad campaign featuring Space Invaders.
In a push to keep sales for the VCS going strong, Atari has launched a 30-second TV ad in 19 major markets to promote the system. Space Invaders is the game anchoring the ad, which is clearly targeting nuclear families in the suburbs. Now, there's a link to this ad that's on YouTube, and it is oddly direct. Did you get a chance to look at it, Peter?
No. Shall we have a look at it right now?
Yes, let's have a look at it right now.
Look at it right now.
Out here we entertain ourselves at home, so we got an Atari video game. There's so many different games to play. We especially like Space Invaders, zapping those little devils from outer space. It's fun, but personally I think the whole idea of creatures from outer space is a little far-fetched.
No other company offers you as many different video game cartridges as Atari.
What the hell? I'm not entirely sure what I've just seen.
Okay, what you've seen is a interesting time capsule of the times. Remember, the United States is basically entering a serious recession, and some would say they're already deep in it in 1980.
Yeah.
And so this starts off with the family father out in the house in the suburbs.
Yes.
Saying, well, we stay home a lot.
Yeah.
Basically, we don't have money to go out anymore.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way to do it on the cheap. So it's an indirect way of him suggesting this is cheap entertainment. You buy it once and you can play forever, and everybody plays, so everybody's happy.
Yes.
So this is marketing at its finest here. They're telling you, hey, in these troubled times, it's a cheap way to keep the entire family from wanting to kill each other or go out and spend big money on movies and theaters and things. Play Space Invaders. And the idea of the father, not the kid speaking, is also ideal because it's targeting the dads. You can be the guy who made everybody happy in the family.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they throw in the bad dad joke about, varmints from outer space or whatever. Well, that's just basically appealing to that dad demographic. It is an amazingly insightful thing because they already know the kids want it. They already know the kids are going to ask for it. This is convincing the dad to buy it. And again, it also shows a little bit of the sexism of the time that a major purchase like this is not going to be decided by mom. It's going to be decided by dad. They could have easily thrown in a scene of mom going, yeah, I think it's great too. No. It's purely the father's decision because this thing does cost a chunk of change at this point in time. This is not a cheap device. This is going to be a very, very expensive purchase, especially in hard times.
Yeah.
So, that's what you just saw. It's brilliant.
Can I have a look at it once more?
Yeah, go for it.
Wonderful. I need to use my headphones for that. I don't know. Maybe it's kids shouting full of joy of killing things. Yeah, maybe.
It's the kids shouting in joy at the killing of things.
Okay. Sorry, it's my dirty European mind.
No, it's all good.
Jesus. Anyhow, Being slightly disturbed. Want to move on?
I never even thought about it, but you're right. The whole idea of just mercilessly killing the space creatures, and thinking this is entertainment. Yeah, that wouldn't really that wouldn't be your first thought for family entertainment in Europe. That is very true, very, very true. Especially such a nonchalant approach to it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not. It's a little like the equivalent of, hey, this shooter is the shooter for the entire family. You can shoot guys in the head and they die instantly.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but you're right. That is a different form of sensitization towards violence. But speaking of selling games on the Atari 2600.
Yes, and moving on. Activision announces sales manager and regional reps.
The world's first third-party developer is getting ready to hit the market, announcing that Clifton E. Crowder will be their national sales manager. So we talked about Activision the last couple months, about how they are getting ready to launch their first lineup of games.
Yeah.
And and they've even got their own infrastructure for it. They are primed and ready to go.
And someone doesn't like it.
No, they don't.
They don't. Atari files suit against Activision.
Activision, the world's first third-party console game developer, founded by former Atari programmers, has been sued by Atari. Atari's claims include trademark infringement and appropriation of trade secrets. The case would be settled out of court a year and a half later, giving an undisclosed amount of money to Atari, but they would not get anything out of the countless other third parties that would pop up over the next few years. And here I do have to give a special thanks to both Alex of They Create Worlds podcast and Ethan of History of How We Play, also the gent who does our wonderful sound effects. They helped with the research on this one because the undisclosed amount of money that we don't know exactly how much they got, but the core of this lawsuit ended up being that the Activision guys had taken some trade secrets with them concerning, how the cartridge worked, how the interface between cartridge and console worked, and they didn't do all of their reverse engineering properly when they started up Activision, so there were some real legitimate claims by Atari here. So apparently they had to fork over quite a bit of cash. But the other companies that would follow in Activision's footsteps, like iMagic and so many others, they did do their reverse engineering properly because they either had learned from this or they weren't coming from inside Atari. And so Activision would be the only ones that had to pony up cash to Atari for this. But yeah, so it's the first salvo, but it basically shows that there were no safety precautions in the chips or in the systems to prevent anybody from making third-party software. Just nobody thought of it. Nobody thought anybody would bother. Again, if you listen to our Don Daglow interview, he talks about a similar event happening at Intellivision, with the Intellivision over at Mattel at the same time, because they're not thinking that anybody would develop third-party software. It just wasn't a conceivable idea during the development of these systems.
Because there's no money in software.
Exactly. There's no money in software, and just, I guess it's the hubris of, we're so good at this, nobody would bother making software for somebody else's system. The only people who have the dev kits and the technical know-how and the manufacturing capabilities to make these cartridges are the people who make the console. Therefore, there's no point in making software for the console.
Mm.
And yeah, that basically is going to become a problem for them in a few years.
I mean, why didn't they just introduce some licensing fees?
Well, if you don't have any lockout chips or any kind of protection systems, then why would I pay you a license for something I don't have to pay a license for?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, oh well. And in non-home console related news,
yes, Sega takes on Chuck E. Cheese with PJ. How do you pronounce that? Pizzazz.
I believe it's supposed to be pizzazz, but it could also be pizzazz or pizza ass. I'm not quite sure. It's Pizzazz.
Oh, they wanted to be cool.
They probably did not succeed. Pizza in my pajamas is just not cool. PJ Pizzazz. Oh well. Dave Rosen, founder of Sega, was on hand to serve the first slice of pizza at Sega's answer to Pizza Time Theater, PJ Pizzazz, on June 9th. The arcade/pizza parlor hybrid would feature a robot mascot, PJ, who would wander around the store and deliver personalized messages to customers. The concept was never picked up as a franchise, and only one additional location was ever opened.
So what kind of personalized messages were delivered?
I tried to find out. It was probably just something innocuous like, "Hi, Timmy, it's your birthday," or something like that. But
someone's waiting for you.
Follow me. Yeah, that seems creepy as hell. And this was one of those corrections that I talked to Ethan about after the last episode went out. That because we talked about the legal battles between Pizza Time Theater, aka Chuck E. Cheese, and can't remember the name of the other one, but the idea that there were only two of them, which is kind of what I insinuated, is wrong. There were a bunch of these attempts to do arcade/pizza parlor amusement centers back in the day, but only two of them really ever caught on. The rest of them seem to all have fizzled out just because there was too much going on and bad management or just not understanding the business or whatever else. And this is Sega's attempt. Remember, this is way before Sega's into the console business. Sega's a purely arcade company at this point. And this is just not going to work. Oh well. So that concludes our voyage to June of 1980. Let's turn on the time machine and head over to June of 1990.
Who plays Nintendo?
Today we have a ton of tips for some of the hottest
titles around. Mario Brothers 3. You can't do that on an 8-bit system.
Welcome to June of 1990. Peter, what's our first story?
Yes, first of all, the fire has been extinguished.
Excellent. That's good to hear.
Exactly. And second, Sega's Last Survivor introduces FPS deathmatch to the arcades. Dude, your titles get longer and longer.
There's some short ones coming up. It'll get better. In Japan, at least, the long-delayed arcade game Last Survivor finally gets released in Japan. The game allows up to 8 players through linked cabinets to shoot their way through ruins as a group of archaeologists looking for treasures while fending off skeletons and mummies. The ray-trace graphics create a smooth, albeit slow experience, but moving around the game world does become more natural over time, with strafing a given, plus the ability to buy power-ups. Sadly, the game wouldn't make it out of Japan, most likely due to the high cost of the cabinets, and only the FM Towns computer would get a very compromised port.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking 1990. We're talking we're talking way before Wolfenstein. We're talking way before Doom. We're not talking way before Faceball 2000. Midi Maze, as it was originally called on the Atari ST. That's really the birth of microcomputer deathmatch. But this game, I had never heard of it before. And before I ran across it in an old magazine, I looked it up. I played it on MAME. This thing's amazing. Amazingly cool. It would have blown me away back in the day. I mean, it doesn't look graphically spectacular now, and there's a link to a video of it running in the show notes below. But it basically has 2 players per cabinet, split screen. It's not 100% first person, since you still have an outline of your sprite on the screen, but it's essentially a first person game where you're running around this map trying to collect treasures, kill guys, walk in the store, get some items, and you have to be the last player on the map at the end of the round. That's why it's called Last Survivor.
Yeah, and how did they realize the ray tracing back then? This is really cracking me up that this thing was ray traced.
Well, I mean, ray tracing is the most efficient way of doing it. This is why Wolfenstein and Doom were both using ray tracing. So the idea is that you only have to draw what you want to draw. You do everything basically in a 2-dimensional plane. So it doesn't have a ceiling. It doesn't have steps or anything like that. So it's just like Wolfenstein in that sense. And it allows you a lot of flexibility to basically move 2-dimensional textures around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not perfect. There's a lot of weird skewing when you get really close to walls and stuff. So just like with a lot of the early Doom-style clones, or even games like, for example, Tomb Raider later on the PlayStation, you're going to get some weird tearing issues and some other weird artifacts here and there. But for the most part, it's very, very interestingly done. And I had some fun playing it for a little while. So it's definitely one of those lost titles that unfortunately never made it out of Japan. And yeah, the home port for the FM Towns is terrible because it doesn't actually use ray tracing. It just kind of uses blocks of graphics in locations. So when you're walking around stuff, it doesn't morph at all. So it doesn't really work. They tried, but they failed. So, but oh well, that was the arcades. Let's go home.
Let's go home. Sega signs deal with Buster Douglas.
Michael Katz's plan to position Sega as a cool brand in comparison with Nintendo has led to another celebrity license being acquired, James Buster Douglas. This follows deals with Joe Montana, Arnold Palmer, Tommy Lasorda, and Michael Jackson. The deal won't produce an innovative title. They'll just slap it on a port of Taito's arcade game Final Blow, but it will help make for some nice TV ads to promote the system. And if you've listened to my 2-part interview with Michael Katz, he talks about this whole episode in great detail. But yeah, so Sega is really trying to push the Genesis as the cool kids machine, and getting all these licenses is part of that that strategy. And Buster Douglas, in case you haven't heard of him, he was a boxer. He was really only a world championship for a split second, for maybe a couple of weeks, and then there was a rematch, and then he loses the title again. So they picked him up right when he had gotten the title, and I don't even think the game came out before he had already lost the title. But it was enough to sell the game to the toy stores and stuff, so it got the game out there. And I think the European release of the game used Evander Holyfield, who was the next world champion, as the licensed boxer on the cover. So by the time it came out in Europe, like a year later, it had already been renamed.
I don't know.
You don't know?
I'm just thinking a whole lot of stuff, man. But I don't know, for some reason, all those them Americans like their sportsmen.
Oh yeah, sports are a huge, huge deal. The only difference is that we have a lot of sports, and Europe tends to be there's a massive, massive concentration on just soccer.
Yeah.
So in Europe, you don't feel like there's as much sports, but when you look at the amount of money spent just on soccer,
oh yeah, sure,
it's so much bigger than any individual sport in the United States.
Oh sure.
That it just wipes everything else out. And that's why you can have so many different athletes from different sports show up in the States and have well-known names. And also because you have different sports, you have different seasons. So, I mean, nowadays a lot of it overlaps because the leagues have gotten bigger and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it used to be literally one sport would end and then the next sport would start. So, like, baseball would start in the spring, I think. I'm really not a sports guy, so anybody, if I got that wrong, sorry. Baseball would start in the spring. Football would be something that would get going in the fall. You would have your other sports in between. Then you have your winter sports. Then you have some summer sports like track and field and things like that. And then other things like boxing would be year round. You'd have hockey and so forth. I think basketball is more of a summer season sport. So it would just be one of those things where the one sport would end, the next sport would start. So even if you didn't like one of them, if you liked two or three of them, you almost never had a pause in what you could watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and also every new console somehow has to have a sports game on it, like some form of an American sports game.
Well, of course.
Maybe at least an NFL game.
at least. But the big thing here is also, and this you can't forget, that they're targeting teenagers. The NES had been targeted at little kids, primarily. Yeah. To go after the teenagers, well, you have to go after the characters that the teenagers think are cool. So on the NES, you had Disney afternoon cartoons and stuff like that. So to differentiate, you go, what do the teenagers like? Well, the teenage boys like the sports guys because they want to feel powerful. They want to identify with these physically powerful, although Tommy Lasorda is an old guy, but okay. And Michael Jackson is still cool at this point. The pedophile thing hadn't come out yet. So the idea of having a sports star on there is going to appeal to that teenage demographic in a way that Mario just can't. Yeah. So, and I mean, it worked to a certain extent for Sega, a company with almost zero market share going into the Genesis, to grab the share that they did was amazing. And a lot of it can be traced back to these early deals that Mike Katz was able to secure. It cost money, but he was able to secure it. Yeah.
Well,
but that's not their only trick.
No, that's not the only trick. I mean, 1990 really was the year of Sega. Sega reveals the Game Gear.
With the Game Boy having been a huge success during the previous Christmas season, leaving Atari's Lynx in the dust and NEC showing off the Turbo Express, Sega couldn't be left behind, finally revealing the Game Gear. While the system would launch in Japan in October, it wouldn't hit US and European shores until April of 1991. So, fond memories of the Game Gear?
Oh no, not at all.
Well, the Game Gear was interesting and different from the Lynx and the Game Boy in that it wasn't really original hardware. The Game Gear was just the Sega Master System. Sega's 8-bit console that had competed with the NES, or lost to the NES, they just crammed it into a small handheld device. Now, this meant that you had wonderful color graphics and everything else, and a massive library of games to fall back on. But what it also meant was that it wasn't really designed from the ground up to be handheld. It ate batteries like it was going out of style. And, and the color screens at the time were really not up to the task. So it's not like a modern color screen that you have on a cell phone. This thing really, really was hard on the eyes. And it would see some really good games made for it, but at the same time, a lot of it just wasn't going to work, sadly.
I mean, and look at it right now. Oh, Lord.
Well, I mean, for the time, when you compare it with the Game Boy, which, is, what, 8 shades of gray or 16? No, I think it was 8 shades of gray. This is, it was an amazing looking piece of tech, but yeah, it was just eating batteries like there was no tomorrow. And I mean, the Turbo Express obviously did the same things, only a little bit better, but it didn't have the backing of a company like Sega to really offer the software that the Game Gear had. And they would end up with some good RPGs. They ended up with an amazing Shinobi game, but it's the also ran handheld console. So, but Sega's not the only one who might be going handheld.
Right. BDL wants to take your NES games on the go.
But only if Nintendo approves. The BDL Express is a handheld NES that plays actual NES carts with a color screen. The company has a fully functioning prototype, but won't go to market without Nintendo's approval. Yeah.
No.
Well, it's never going to happen. No. Nintendo was not going to approve this.
And why should they?
Well, why should they? Exactly. This was a tiny little development company there's even a picture of their prototype that's basically a handmade device. And the problem is, number one, Nintendo has the Game Boy, which is designed around the idea of being cost effective, around the idea of being battery efficient, and they've already invested a lot in that device. The NES, especially the American NES, as opposed to the Famicom, the cartridges are huge. Yeah. I mean, they're big. To be able to build a device that would play those cartridges as a handheld means that your device is just ginormous.
Dude, it's like the early telephones where you have this, this big ass bag you have to carry.
It's something like that, yes. So, yeah, this thing was dead on arrival, but I do remember the talk of this thing coming out. Just kind of, everybody was like, wow. I mean, it looks like something Ben Heck would put together on his show. It's just a weird mashup. And, yeah, it's never going to come to anything. But it was an interesting little side note and anecdote, and you can see a picture of it in one of the links in the show notes below. But BDL isn't the only one trying to do weird things with the NES.
No, because Galoob announces the game Genie. Like a genie on a bottle. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. Makes your wishes come true. The ability to modify games through codes is nothing new to home computer gamers, but console gamers will finally be able to enjoy such luxuries as infinite lives and invulnerability in their favorite console titles. Oh, and there will be a lawsuit from Nintendo, of course.
So first of all, it's like a device where you plug in your game cartridge and you change the code so that you have infinite lives.
Basically, what it's really doing, if I understand the tech properly, it's a hex editor.
Yeah.
So what we would do as a peek or a poke on a computer back in the day This is basically just changing certain values in the game's memory as it's going into the machine, so that different values get computed. And
how did you know? Yeah, how did you know what kind of code to type in?
Very good question. When you bought it, it came with a booklet with codes for a bunch of popular titles. So a whole bunch of existing games, they just gave you the codes for those. And very quickly in all the major gaming magazines every month, there would be lists of additional codes for the Game Genie.
So I take it Nintendo didn't win the lawsuit.
Nintendo did not win this lawsuit. They sued. Now, this Galoob is the one bringing it out, but it's really Camerica, which was Codemasters. So we've talked about them before, unlicensed title games and stuff, where they had their, their extra system and cheap cartridges and whatnot. And they had the technical stuff down. They understood the technology, and they liked doing this kind of extra little add-on type of tech. And so Nintendo sues them, and we will talk more about the lawsuit when it finally gets filed. But without checking it up again, the crux of the Nintendo lawsuit is that the Game Genie is illegally altering copyrighted material. So the games are meant to be played a certain way, and by changing the codes, you are changing the game. And if I remember correctly, it basically comes down to the judge and the trier of fact deciding the game is still the same. The game hasn't been altered. Mm-hmm. If the consumer wants to play the game in its original form, they have that option. The fact that they also have the option to play it in a different way, without altering the original product after they've purchased it, so they are now the owner of it, is up to them. It would be the equivalent of me buying a copy of Dracula, the book, and then crossing out a bunch of words and reading it without those words. I haven't violated the copyright. I haven't made a new copy of the game. I've just altered my own property. Mm-hmm. And that's what ends up being the crux of this battle. And they lose. And Galoob will be releasing Game Genies for every other device. For the Genesis, for the I think there's a Game Boy version. I mean, it's basically everything that they can fit a Game Genie on, they'll make a Game Genie. Then later on, there's going to be similar products like the Game Shark and so on and so forth. Yeah, so.
Interesting.
And then later on, they'll just make games so easy that you won't need that. So, go figure.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
Yeah.
But story-wise, they are interesting. Anyhow, story-wise, Acclaim is doing the Bartman.
Acclaim has acquired the rights to the brand new hit series The Simpsons for home console games. And this will also extend later on to home computer games. And the first game that they will release is Bart versus the Space Mutants. So, yeah, this is a huge license. Do you remember the first time you saw The Simpsons?
I don't remember the first time I saw The Simpsons. No,
Do you remember a world without The Simpsons?
No.
As someone who was there when this phenomenon broke, when it came out, yeah. It's hard to really put into words how big The Simpsons were, how massive that license became. And, well, very soon we'll have an interview with the founder of Acclaim, and I just need to edit it. It turned into a lot of hours. Me and him hit it off, and we basically have regular meetings now where we just chat, even though the interview is long recorded. Super nice guy. And he talks about how he he didn't even know The Simpsons, but his kid told him, hey, yeah, you should get this license, so he jumped on it when it was still cheap to be had. And Acclaim is going to release a ton of Simpsons games.
Yeah.
Are they any good? Not really. No. They're pretty terrible. But there's going to be a steady stream of Simpsons games on the 8 and 16-bit platforms through Acclaim. And there's going to be Pinball Table. Back then, there's some new modern ones today, so there's multiple pinball tables nowadays. And there's going to be an amazing arcade game by Konami, which, because Acclaim has the home console rights, is not going to get ported, but for a port to the Commodore 64 and DOS computers, sadly. So, yeah. But that's another story for another time in the future. But for our purposes right now, Acclaim has just acquired one of the most valuable licenses on the planet. And they will make money off of it. And
okay. So let's celebrate. Sierra celebrates its 10th anniversary.
The Sierra News Magazine, Sierra's in-house publication, looks back at the company's first 10 years with retrospectives on what has come before and what will lie ahead for gaming's next decade. They get a lot right, including the rise of CDs and massively multiplayer games. The one thing that they were wrong about, sadly, was that there would be a 20th anniversary retrospective.
Oh, well, I mean, should they have written "and then we die"?
I mean, they got really, really close. I mean, we talked about how Sierra died earlier this year. And so they just shy of 20 years. And I mean, the name of the company, the brand name survived, but who cares about that? And it's kind of sad. I mean, it really is interesting to see that they had these 10 years of success, and then it just, they just couldn't adapt to the 3D world, so to speak. They were just too stuck on the old point-and-click adventure games, and they just didn't have the right processes, I think, in place to develop new, innovative product, and they weren't actively going out and finding new product outside the way that they had in the early days of the company. But that's just my outside perspective. I may be completely wrong on that. And also, when they offered Ken Williams a ton of money, and it was a publicly held company, he didn't really have a choice, as he said himself in interviews. So, okay. Sierra's dead. We can't end with a company dying because it's still not dead. But we can turn on the time machine.
Yeah, let's do that.
And off we go.
As an industry, video gaming is bigger than Hollywood.
Y2K electronic launch in history.
Welcome to June of 2000. I still get a kick out of saying 2000 like that.
2000 somehow always sounds like the future.
Yeah, at least for me it will. I'm sure my daughter will look at me going, what are you talking about? But oh well. Okay, let's kick it off in the Far East. Or is that politically incorrect nowadays? Japan. Let's just go with Japan.
Let's go to Japan. The Spring Tokyo Game Show disappoints.
The twice-yearly Tokyo Game Show should have been a showcase for a ton of upcoming titles, considering that the PS2 had just launched. The PSX was still going strong, Nintendo needed to keep the N64 alive a bit longer, and Sega's chances to sway gamers to the Dreamcast were dwindling fast. But Sony and Nintendo both seem to have retreated from the show, with hardly any titles to show off. third parties seem obsessed with iterations of existing games like DDR, and only Sega showed off exciting new titles like Phantasy Star Online, Eternal Arcadia, Grandia 2, Jet Set Radio, Samba de Amigo, and Metropolis Street Racer. So, basically, Sega is showing off all the big guns of the Dreamcast, some of the hottest titles that they can, and everybody else is just like, we don't care. Yeah. So apparently the Tokyo Game Show no longer all that important. I think a couple years later the Tokyo Game Show will stop being twice yearly and only once yearly, just because it became too expensive for the participants to show up twice a year to show stuff off. But Sega owned the show for all it's worth.
Oh yeah, the show that just disappoints. Cool.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a little bit like last year's E3 where Sony was like, nah.
Well, they've been doing that for a while. I mean, yeah. It's the problem with these shows is that they cost a lot of money to put on. They're good for the industry as a whole, but for the individual companies in the short run, I can see how they could argue that it doesn't do them any favors. Yeah. Or it's not the cost benefit analysis is there. And it'll be interesting to see what happens now with COVID and E3 being canceled, what the effect of that will be on the future sales of shows. Well, the future of shows in general is going to be at least 3-4 years before conventions come back. I can't see conventions coming back any sooner than that, sadly. But I honestly don't know if it's really going to be financially viable for the companies, or at least profitable for the companies to do it. But who knows? Maybe they'll come back after the COVID and there'll be such a pent-up demand for big, big spectacle that consumers will reward those companies that did spend the money. So, but apparently at this expo, Sega was not rewarded because they're going to get their butts handed to them very, very quickly. So, but speaking of people who are not getting their butts handed to them,
Square quintuples its profits.
Final Fantasy VIII has knocked it out of the park for Square with 6.19 million unit sales worldwide.
This series is just a cash cow.
It is. But I mean, nowadays, Final Fantasy VIII is kind of the forgotten child. It's hard to imagine that it was such a massive seller right out of the gate. And I mean, hardcore Final Fantasy players still talk about it, but it's just gone under in comparison with Final Fantasy VII. I mean, it's riding that wave of the ginormous success of 7. And and it also shows us just how popular the PlayStation 1 still is, because it's a PlayStation 1 game. But, oh well. And speaking of
Talking about PlayStation, Sony revealed plans for their broadband adapter.
The PS2's broadband adapter will be a 100 megabit Ethernet adapter with a built-in hard drive. Their hope is to sell not only online games, but also offer PSX games as downloads, given the system's backward compatibility. Sadly, this wouldn't come to pass, and Sony wouldn't establish its own servers, leaving that up to the individual publishers, although they would require a Sony identification check later on. So
2 questions. First of all, why do you need a hard drive in a Ethernet adapter?
You don't need a hard drive in the Ethernet adapter, but if you're going to play online games like EverQuest, where there's a lot of data about the world that you need to cache, that you just can't store on the DVD, So things like your character's stats, the stats of the characters around you, and so forth.
Right.
You need to be able to dump
doesn't
that.
have a hard drive.
Exactly. The PS2 was purely a disk-based system. So you could manage that with a on-site game. So if you had the game on disk, you could manage through game design issues, that you weren't going to be overflowing your RAM. But when you're going on into an online multiplayer game, you have to have that extra hard drive space basically as a RAM disk to be able to deal with new situations constantly coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, so they just built it into the Ethernet adapter.
Okay, it makes sense. And the second question, what is the so-called Sony identification check?
Basically, it was a way of preventing people from logging onto the system that were not using a PlayStation, and also to prevent people from stealing potential online purchases and the like. So you had to be logged on to your Sony account in order to access stuff.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So, even though Sony wouldn't have their own servers, they're talking a big game at this point with, being able to do online purchases of old PlayStation games and whatnot. But, you're dealing with a 100 megabit, you're dealing with a hard drive that, could probably hold one, maybe two games, but download speeds at this point in time, we're still going to make that a very, very lengthy process.
Yeah.
So, it was a little bit too much too soon. And remember, Sony doesn't have a backlog of games prior to the PlayStation 1. Remember, when Nintendo finally does the Wii store, they start with things like the NES. So the games are minuscule little file sizes. So it's super easy, even with relatively bad internet connections, for them to still turn that into a business model. Oh well, big plans, don't go very far. And of course, the Xbox is going to have both the hard drive and the Ethernet port built in, making games like Halo far more accessible and successful than anything that the PlayStation manages to organize.
Mm-hmm.
But
moving on,
people, yes,
winter's coming and Nintendo gives away free gloves.
Well, it's not for winter. As part of an $80 million settlement with the state of New York, Nintendo is giving away free sports gloves to purchasers of Mario Party. Apparently, certain minigames cause cuts, blisters, and other hand injuries to players.
All right. Seriously?
Seriously. So
you guys are dumb to use the controller, so we have to give you gloves. Would this case actually have a chance? Would you have a chance of winning that case in Germany?
I don't know. I don't know what consumer protection laws would say about a product sold to children that basically is asking the children to do massively repetitive motions with their hands in such a way that you would have long-term stress-related injuries. I don't know. I doubt you would get something like this, but in Germany you also wouldn't have a jury.
Yeah.
So a jury, if you put normal everyday Germans up there and to look at it and say, wait a second, why didn't you guys test this or something, or these kids have these injuries, you might get a slightly different result. But remember, in Germany, nobody pays for their own medical bills because everybody has health insurance. That covers everything. If you're in the States and your kid has this injury, you have to go to the doctor and suddenly there's hundreds of dollars out of your pocket. So the idea of a product that is designed to elicit a reaction that's going to lead to injury also means that it's designed to lead to medical expenses, which wouldn't be part of the consideration over here. So over here you might get a warning label on the product, but you're not going to get the monetary award that you would get in the States. Now, this should be noted, this only applied to Mario Party 1. It did not apply to the subsequent Mario Parties. And I'm not sure if it's because there was a label on the subsequent Mario Parties or because they took out those mini games that would have caused this problem.
Okay.
That I don't know, and I honestly couldn't be bothered to look it up. So if any of our listeners know, please drop us a line. I'm quite curious about it.
Oh, man. Oh, man. Well, they surely made these mistakes because they didn't have a college degree.
Very nice transition. I am very, very happy with that one.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Gaming is now a college degree.
University of California, Irvine has announced their Interdisciplinary Gaming Studies program, which will focus on studying video game design as well as gaming's impact on American culture. The program will include classes on design, programming, psychology, art, human kinetics, dance, information, science, and drama.
It took them quite a while, didn't it?
They did take them quite a while. And I think that this is the first program of its kind. And when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense that it took this long, except for the fact that I think they were just covering some of this stuff in programming. But the idea of game design, video game design, as beyond programming, sort of the art of the designer, is something that was very, very early in Japan. So, for example, Shigeru Miyamoto was not a programmer. He didn't know how to program. He was an artist. And when he's designing Donkey Kong, his first game, he's not designing it from a programming standpoint. He's designing it from a gameplay standpoint and from a graphic standpoint. And he's working and basically leading programmers and technicians to get to a result. Around that same time, and in the early years of the North American and especially the European development, it's about a programmer figuring out a cool trick and then trying to build a game around whatever they learned. And so you sometimes get these prodigy game developers who are both really good at figuring out how to make the hardware do what you want it to do and how to create a balanced game design. But that level of unicorn is relatively seldom, so you end up with a lot of games that feel half-assed. Like they're wonderful grains of an idea, but they don't have that unbelievable depth of a Mario or a Donkey Kong. Because they don't have that separate designer placement. Again, the Don Daglow interview, the first part of it, which is up on our Patreon right now, talks about his early days at Electronic Arts and the way he describes how the producer role at Electronic Arts worked as a person who would guide the project but was not allowed to design. It was absolutely forbidden for a producer to be a designer. Meant that it was mostly the programmers doing the design work, and often, even though the producer could see problems with the design, they couldn't just interfere and design the game. And so this, I think that this degree is a side effect of that very late adoption of the designer role. But it is coming, and I mean, now it's standard worldwide. So
yeah.
Oh, well.
Interesting.
Let's talk some corporate news.
Let's talk some corporate news. Havas may lose the Tolkien license.
After Havas, owners of Sierra dismissed the development team behind their online Middle-earth title last year, now the question has arisen of whether they will continue to have the license for Tolkien's works going into the release of the Fellowship of the Rings movie. The rumor mill is saying that the license may be taken away, opening up a bidding war for the license, which of course will quickly turn into a license to print money.
Oh yeah. And did they lose the license?
Sort of. What ends up happening is that Middle-earth Online gets canceled. And there is then a squabble over the rights, because what they had were the rights to games based off the books. Now you're going to have the license for the games based on the movies. And so what's going to end up happening is you're going to get two games, The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Rings, which are based on the books. And quite honestly, they're terrible. Don't even bother. And we're not talking about the old ones from the 80s. These come out around.
I think I had The Fellowship of the Rings.
Would not surprise me. It got bundled with a bunch of other stuff because Havas, especially here in Europe, was dumping a lot of their games in those bundles and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, this EA ends up with the license for the movie games. And this is why their first game is The Two Towers. There's no Fellowship of the Rings computer or video game based on the first movie. So they missed the window for that first film. But the next year when the second movie comes out, they're ready to rock and roll. And we see then a slew of games over the next few years from EA using the Lord of the Rings license and the imagery from the movies.
We have a lot of the rings. The return of I just remember we had a lot of the Rings, the Return of the King game, and I think it was made by EA.
Yeah, that was EA.
I remember this friend of mine and I playing this for like an hour, and we were basically through it because it was just a constant button mashing, fighting of waves after waves after waves. And no real story whatsoever. You just hit like 10 levels or something like that, and you went from level to level, and it was basically always the same. You were in the level, and you had to fight your way through it.
That's what the Two Towers game was as well. Yes. It wasn't a strategy game. I mean, they did do strategy games later on. I actually spent an ungodly. Yeah, I spent an ungodly amount of time with their. There was a Game Boy Advance game called Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, which was actually a turn-based strategy game, and I had a ton of fun with that one. But it was a rocky start for EA, but you could just tell they honestly didn't have that initial license that first year, and that bit them in the butt.
Yeah.
So,
and they didn't really know what to do with the second and the third movie. I mean, everything that was a little bit a spin-off, like maybe this Game Boy Advance game, which I don't know, but the Battle for Middle-earth, the strategy game, I really enjoyed that one.
Exactly, and I mean, and I think they might still have the license to this day. I'm not quite sure, but it's just one of those situations where a good game takes at least 2 or 3 years to develop. And when you consider that they get the Two Towers out in time for the movie, they may have had a year, maybe 18 months to develop that, which is not a tremendous amount of time.
Well, The latest game, I think it is Shadow of Mordor, was published by Warner Brothers.
That could be. It could be that Warner Brothers has gone back and now controls it again because they were also the ones who did the movies. So it's very possible that EA doesn't have the license anymore and that it is, I mean, yeah, that just makes perfect sense that Warner Brothers would have just taken it back onto themselves. Trying to think. Oh, yeah, Warner Brothers has been in control of it for a long time. Yeah, okay, Warner Brothers already did Aragorn's Quest back in 2010. So, yeah, they've been at it for a long time then. Sorry, just looking through the Moby Games entries for Lord of the Rings. And a lot of people have had the license over the years. I mean, Melbourne House all the way back in the 80s. Then you had Interplay had it for a while. Then Havas had it. And it just kept going from company to company to company. And so it's one of those evergreen licenses that is always going to make money. It's always going to sell to a certain degree, and therefore, you know what? More power to them. And hopefully someday we'll get a really cool game again. So, yeah.
We'll see. I think a Gollum game's on the making.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, yeah, why not? Why not?
We'll see.
Sorry, I'm not too excited about that. But hey, who knows? It could be a good game. Yeah. Of course, we know how it's going to end, but still, it could be a good game. Okay, but we got more. More
let's
news.
move on. Ubisoft continues to gobble up companies.
Speaking of French conglomerates, this time they've gone after Sinister Games. The founders, Ken Klopp and Paul Megan, would go on to run a variety of companies in the future. And yeah, Sinister Games, not really a super well-known company nowadays. Not a super well-known company back then. But it's just one more notch in the Ubisoft quiver at this point. They're just grabbing as many companies as they can, trying to expand as much as they can. Yeah.
Okay. Some guys are expanding, some guys are bleeding out. The bleeding at Mattel Interactive continues.
Oh, yes. As we've previously reported, Bernie Stolar, ousted head of Sega, took over the reins of Mattel Interactive a few months ago, and he's cleaning house. The Learning Company, which Mattel purchased for an ungodly sum in stock, is hemorrhaging cash at the tick of $100 million a quarter. Next Gen magazine is reporting that he's laid off more than 500 people, and more layoffs are on the way. Yeah, so Bernie Stolar is trying to stop the bleeding. Spoiler alert, he does not succeed. The Learning Company is too far gone, and Mattel's attempt to get into the video game business is, just doomed from the outset.
Everyone is doomed, man. Also, Eidos is doomed. They dropped by 51%.
Yeah, the house that Lara built seems to be on shaky ground. The company blames Daikatana, which isn't named in their report but is clearly meant when it talks about tightening, quote, controls, unquote, inside of the company's development process. The big reason they claim for their flip from $39.2 million in profits in 1999 to a loss of $26.8 million in 2000 is because the PSX market has softened due to the impending launch of new systems. Tomb Raider fatigue couldn't be at fault. So I actually linked to the entire fourth quarter, to the entire report in the links below, and I read through most of it. It's just the fourth quarter report. It's not the big annual report. But When they talk about controls to try to prevent, budgets from going overboard and stuff, they're clearly talking about Daikatana because it costs so much money. And the fact that they weren't prepared for the PlayStation to cease being as profitable of platform just shows that they really didn't know what they were getting themselves into here. Eidos, it's a long... the company had been around in one form or another for a long time at this point. Yeah. But they just got too big, too fast, and they were not ready for the generational jump. And it shows. Mm. Sadly. So, Eidos is not going to do well in the very near future. So, 51% drop in your stock, that'll hurt. That'll hurt a lot.
That really hurts, man. That really hurts.
But we're not done with... Now we got some good corporate news.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw in the word Wirecard a little quick. But yeah, another story. Anyway, Sucker Punch has announced that they're working on a PS2 title.
Sucker Punch, which was founded by former Microsoft developers and was only released one title so far, Rocket the Robot on Wheels, for the N64, will be developing their second title for the PS2. Why am I mentioning this? Because that title will be Sly Cooper, one of my all-time favorites, and, well, I just wanted to talk about it.
But you did. Apple is working on a PC-compatible OS. Because, trust me, guys, he won't stop.
It's such a great series. That trilogy is amazing. Okay. Yes, so Apple is working on a PC-compatible OS.
Yes.
Zone magazine reports that Apple is developing a new operating system that can run on both Apple and PC-compatible machines called Darwin. The Darwin OS, derived from the Next Step OS developed by Steve Jobs' NextCorp, would eventually become the foundation of OS X or OS X and the current line of Mac operating systems, including iOS. Now, when I chose this story a few weeks ago, I did not know that we were going to get a brand new story last week. Namely, Apple has announced that they are going to discontinue using Intel chips and move over to using ARM-based chips for their computers, for the Macs. So they're going to be basically unifying a large part of the hardware architecture between their phone business and their computer business. So it's basically exactly 20 years later that they're ending their flirtation with the Intel-based CPUs.
So it's going to be one OS to rule them all.
Well, you're still not going to get anybody who really needs to use a computer to buy a Mac, but that's another issue entirely. And I know I'm just asking the Mac hordes to come down on me for that one, but buy yourself a real computer. So yeah, but I mean this kind of, I mean we've talked about it before, how they kept trying to push the Mac as a gaming platform, and now we've got the video cards, and now we've got Halo, and blah 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 blah. The reality is that the lack of compatibility with the chips, especially the PowerPC architecture, was really holding them back. Too much of the software needed to be reprogrammed to run effectively on a Mac. And moving over to the Intel chips basically took some of that weight off of their shoulders, allowed for easier portability, and just made the entire environment, the Mac user environment, easier. But all good things must come to an end.
All things must come to an end. Yeah. This is what Richard Garriott said when he left Origin Systems.
After the disastrous
maybe not.
launch, or maybe not. After the disastrous launch of Ultima 9, the father of the series and co-founder of Origin Systems, Richard Garriott, has left the company. Officially, it was claimed to have been amicable, with Garriott wanting to develop brand new IP, while EA felt that the market was too competitive and that Origin should stick to the existing IP of Ultima Online. The reality was that all products being developed at Origin at the time, including Privateer Online, had been cancelled. 20 designers had been axed, and it didn't seem likely that EA wanted anything more from Origin other than UO. Several former devs went online to counter the narrative that Garriott had left voluntarily. Garriott would go on to found Destination Games and release the online RPG Tabula Rasa. Curiously, EA also was showing off preview images of Ultima Online 2 at the same time as this news was breaking, but that game would also get axed within the next year. So, this really is the end of an era. I mean, it's our last story. It's not the death of a company, but in a way it is the death of a company. Because Origin is never really going to be anything more than the name of EA's online store after this. And
right.
It is an important company. It's a company that without it, we wouldn't have maybe gotten the... We would have gotten it sooner or later, but we wouldn't have gotten the rush to constantly upgrade DOS hardware the way that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought us some of the most spectacular games. I mean, the Wing Commander series is the birth of the CD full motion video cutscene. It's the birth of the cinematic action game. The Ultima series is just groundbreaking in the way it evolved role-playing games and open-world games. UO completely changes what an MMO can be. It's a company whose mark is left on us. The first real FPS game or first-person role-playing game is Ultima Underworld, even before Wolfenstein comes out. So... Now, and the people who left the company and went on to do amazing things like Deus Ex and System Shock. So it is sad to see how they died, basically through EA not understanding or not properly managing the company. And yeah, c'est la vie. I take it none of those games mean anything to you, correct?
Not really.
No. So sad. So sad. So at some point we're going to have to sit down and play Wing Commander or something just to get a feel for it. So you can enjoy the visceral experience of shooting down Kilrathi or sending them a nasty message right before one of your missiles takes them out through the tailpipe. It's fun stuff.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. Dude, in 10 years, our podcast in 10 years, I will be so shady about, talking so much, about everything that's going on. But right now it's like... Okay.
There you go. Okay.
So guys, stay tuned for me actually contributing.
It'll be here. Okay, well that concludes our time trip for June of 2020. Any closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. All the good things must come to an end. And sometimes the bad things as well.
And this episode counts in the category A or category B?
This will be for our listeners to decide.
Exactly. And you know how you can tell us what your decision was? By leaving a comment on iTunes,
this is not the way.
YouTube,
This is not the
or
way.
whatever
Yeah,
program you're using to listen to this.
No,
And,
this is not the way. The
no?
right way is if you like our podcast, sign up as a Patreon, give us $1. If you do not like it, give us $2.
There you go. There you go. Show us through your vote with your wallet and let us know whether or not you like the show or not. Okay?
Exactly.
That's how
you
this
can leave a comment as
right?
well, but
yeah, that's how this
who
works.
does it anymore?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Remember, you can all of our social media and contact information is in the show notes. Yeah. Patreon is up. We're going to have a ton. I mean, I have been interviewing people nonstop. We've got some really, really good stuff coming down the pipeline. So be certain to follow us on that. And
he doesn't have time to talk to his wife anymore. So yeah.
Hey, I've been doing all these interviews starting at 11 p.m. at night. So yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. But okay. Everybody from COVID land to all of you out there listening when this comes out or listening to it many, many years from now wondering what was COVID again? Yeah. Have a good night.
First, second, or the third wave. Yeah. Have a good night.
Is wave infinite an option? No. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Have fun.